Ironworkers sweat over hot pig iron.
One has not lost respect for it in all these years. You have to leave after a few seconds max.
Rafters on swaying logs.
This is work. This is what the hands of someone who works hard look like.
And shipbuilders in the steel hull.
You're crouched the whole time. If you're working below deck there, it's not nice.
Das ist nicht schön.
8 o'clock in the morning in Wolfratshausen on the Loisach, a tributary of the Isar. The Isar rafters have already been at work for an hour. They have to finish 3 rafts in an hour and a half. It's all manual labor.
It has to go very quickly because the raft is supposed to be ready at 8:30. There's never enough time because we're not allowed to start building the raft until 7 a.m. That wasn't the case in the past when the rafters didn't have such a stressful time. We were able to start at 3:30 in the morning without any noise pollution. Today, people are annoyed when you start before 7 a.m.
Heute schimpft man, wenn man vor 7 Uhr anfängt.
Josef Seidner has been a rafter for 55 years. His family runs the business in the 5th generation. Josef has been with his father since he was a boy. At the age of 75, the father now does the lighter work. 18 logs per raft. They are assembled floating on the river.
They now have to catch the tree, one of them with the stack. You have to make sure the wood doesn't float away, and the others have to position it exactly so that it lies nicely against the other tree so that there's no big gap. And then they have to assemble it. So everyone has their task down there.
Every day anew, 2 to 3 men are needed for this. Nothing has changed in the technique. They assemble their Isar rafts as has been the case for centuries.
Anyone who stacks must pull tight, and the one who assembles the logs works very intensively. A raft like this has 90 wedges, and they all have to be driven into the wood. To drive in 90 wedges with the raft axe, that's quite a feat.
And the work is dangerous too. The logs are almost 7 meters long and weigh 1,500 weight. And it's slippery. Something can happen quickly here if you don't concentrate. One person who knows the job inside out is Michele, known as Mika. He has been a professional raftsman for 8 years.
You have a long rod. You have it behind you with the iron tip in front, so you balance on the water. And then you make sure you don't lose the trees. Because if you mess up in your job as a stacker, you quickly lose a log, especially at high tide. And then you have to swim after it and get it.
Mika is a lock driver, one of the hardest jobs on the water. He's originally from Sicily. He's a good example that tradition and integration can come together.
Well, you have to prove yourself in life, and I think that also has something to do with integration, to adopt the tradition of a country in your life. That's important.
Originally, the Seidner family transported goods to Munich on the rafts. Wolfratshausen was a rafting stronghold.
My 2 ancestors, grandfather and great-grandfather, were all still transporting goods, that is, wood, beer barrels, everything that could be transported on the water. And in 1910, my grandfather created a second mainstay here in Wolfratshausen, because then the train arrived, and with the rail came the end of transports on rafts.
The family made a virtue out of necessity and created a second mainstay with passenger transportation. Today, they exclusively transport tourists and locals. Season is from April to mid-September. 25,000 guests per year. Done. At just before 9 a.m., they are ready. The 60 guests can go on board. At least 2 rafters are needed. The number 2, next to Mika today, is Patrick Weidner.
Guten Morgen.
Good morning. I also feel strange, but that's normal. We have only little water. There are some stones in it. For the first 20 minutes until we are in the canal, we all have to stay squat. Because if we hit a stone, we can get out and push. Later, when we are in the canal, we can move freely. Smoking, drinking, that's all fine. We'll make sure we have a good ride together.
The raft sets off. Will they arrive dry-footed? From the Loisach to the Elbe in the southeast of Hamburg, steel ships are repaired here instead of wooden rafts. Among others, the Hamburg port ferries. This ferry was completely modernized. There is almost nothing that the shipbuilders have not touched. Technology, insulation, ceilings, floors were overhauled or renewed. Also the rudder propellers. About half a year of work. Torben Grote and apprentice Melvin Ommer have worked a lot on the ship in recent months. Today is a special day. The first of the 2 propulsion engines is to be returned to the ship. The starboard engine weighing several tons. It is still standing in the hall next door.
It's the right one. That one over there. Is there a sign up there with you? Oh, up there. Port. Ah, shit, you were right. So, I was lying again.
At the very beginning of the maintenance work, the shipbuilders removed the engine. The parts have been overhauled and can now be reinstalled. But this is not an easy job.
That's the same engine, but the electronics that are in there, starboard, they're actually set to that engine. So that's why we can't swap port and starboard.
The shipbuilders want to take the engine outside to the ship with the forklift. Apprentice Melvin has been at it for 3 years. Soon he will be finished. New blood is rare because the job is tough. But it's still a dream job for Melvin. Moving the engine away with a forklift is tricky, as Torben Grote knows.
Melvin, you have to drive very, very slowly and drive straight underneath. I know it's difficult. You also have to drive very, very carefully right away. Very slowly, please. Weight pretty much 1.5 tons, and that's the maximum weight for the forklifts.
Melvin is trying very carefully, but without success.
That's bad. Yep, it's no use. We have to get the trailer. It's probably the clutch hanging onto it. The machine weighs 1.5 tons, but there's now also a clutch attached to the front, with 500 kilos. And our forklift can only handle 1.5 tons. So now we're going to bring in the trailer. We have an old plate trailer and we can put it on there with the overhead cranes. And then we can drive it nicely in front of the office, and then we can get to it with our gantry crane.
With a crane and trailer, it should be possible. After all, the crane can handle up to 5 tons. To lift the engine, the 2 shipbuilders get shackles. They want to use them to attach the crane chains to the engine, but the shackles somehow don't fit as they should. They couldn't find others.
No, this really sucks now.
Das ist doch jetzt echt zum Kotzen.
We need Christoph. Where's Christoph working right now? I'm sure he took all the shackles with him, because they were in that bucket. Let's check and see where Christoph is.
Ja, wollen wir da mal hingehen? Lass uns da doch mal hingehen. Wollen wir auf die Reiherstieg gehen?
The Reiherstieg is another ferry that's being repaired at the same time. That's where the engine comes out today, so the colleagues could also use shackles.
Da!
There they are.
Hat er sie? Da!
Up yours. Just you wait.
Shackle thief found. That was quick. Torben grabs the part, but now quickly back. There is still a lot to do.
There it is. You might think that's the only shackle we have of this size, but it's not.
Ist aber nicht so.
The shipbuilders would like to complete this work today. No need for stress. They are still well on schedule. Melvin now prefers to look very closely so that everything remains intact.
Sure, it's a pretty big piece of equipment, it costs a lot of money, and it's just been overhauled. Of course, you're always careful and make sure that nothing gets broken, that you don't bump into anything. The paint should also remain. Got it?
Done. Now the starboard engine can be loaded and taken to the ship. Outside, the next crane then takes over the part. And will it work? Salzgitter, furnace operator Adrian Zajak on his way to work. His workplace is particularly hot.
When I first came to the kiln hall my first day, it was gigantic. The size of the kiln, of everything that's standing here, was very exciting for me, and I'll never forget that day.
War für mich sehr aufregend und den Tag vergesse ich einfach nicht.
That was 20 years ago. The dimensions haven't changed since. Zajak works on the blast furnace. Here, iron is made from ore and coke. This blast furnace is in full swing. Adrian wants to take a pig iron sample.
We are now at Furnace A. Tapping is in progress. Here you can really see how the material comes out of the tap hole, so to speak. The liquid material with a temperature of about 1450 degrees.
After the so-called runoff, the iron runs from the blast furnace through the channel to the torpedo ladles, with which it is transported away.
I'm going to take a pig iron sample now from the second manhole, and I need this protection so that I don't burn myself, that I don't get any sparks. The radiation is just too high. That means that I can minimize the radiation by using this silver jacket, and that is my protection, so to speak.
Without this protection, it would be too dangerous.
I'd burn my skin. Splashes could get in here, sort of into the top of the t-shirt. That's why this is our life insurance.
Helmet and gaiters are still needed. The heat protection suit consists of several layers. The aluminium coating protects the body from the heat radiation. Without this suit, Adrian could not stand so close to the gutter. It would be far too hot. For each torpedo ladle, the steelworkers take an iron sample. A risk of burns is everywhere.
If, for example, you have now worked on the hot gutter, then you sweated. That's the normal function of your body. And when you then go away from the gutter, then you notice the temperature differences. And the danger is simply, for example, at colder temperatures outside, like in the winter, to get a cold or whatever.
The smelters use the sample to determine the iron quality. If it's not right, they have to change the parameters in the blast furnace.
One always approaches this pig iron with respect. In all these years, one has not lost respect for it. So you still have, well, I wouldn't say fear, but as I said, a lot of respect for it.
After a few minutes, the sample has cooled down and can immediately be sent to the laboratory.
It will have a residual heat of about 500 degrees, and you actually handle it like a raw egg. The laboratory then evaluates the analyses of the tapping, that is, the sample, and we get the results sent to our computers at our control stations.
Convenient. In the past, smelters had to break the sample and estimate the condition of the pig iron based on the breakage. Now, Adrian has to be a little more brutal with the sample and tap off the protruding material. Then the piece is ready for the lab. The blast furnace produces ejector. It is empty. Therefore, the tap hole is closed with the tampon gun. It takes about an hour until the next tapping. Pig iron is produced in the blast furnace. For this purpose, the blast furnace operators put ore and coke, as well as other materials, into the furnace. The blast furnace is heated with 1200 degrees hot air. Reduction with the aid of carbon monoxide produces pig iron and slag, which are melted and drained off at regular intervals during tapping. The pig iron is separated from the slag and fed into the steel mill. The Isar rafters set off from Wolfratshausen with 60 good humoured passengers. 28 kilometers. The raft will travel for a good 6 hours to reach its destination in the south of Munich. There are 3 rafts from this company. A total of 3 raft companies are on the Isar, 11 rafts a day. 3 are already ahead. The passengers still have to sit, so that the 2 rafters can see something, because at the beginning of the route there are many stones in the river, and here you can easily get stranded. And then the trip would end abruptly.
I can look to the back to see what my colleague is doing and react if I need to. And he also sees the position of the raft well, like a captain on the bridge. He always has to see where we're going, otherwise we'll end up like the Titanic. Patrick and I are a very good, well-coordinated team. I know exactly when he scratches his ear that it's going to rain tomorrow. No nonsense. We always keep eye contact. And I know exactly when he's rowing now. I have to follow up.
Patrick in front gives the direction and makes sure that they don't hit anything. Mika has to use muscle power to ensure that the raft stays on course. The 2 communicate by hand signal.
As there is so little water today, we took along an engine. It gives us a little push. And we have to signal it by hand. If it's a bit too slanted, then it always pushes me away at the front. And that's why I give this sign, so that he knows he has to align the engine a bit in that direction, that we don't end up somewhere we don't want to be. Now the raft is crooked. Now I'll straighten it out again.
At 5 to 6 kilometers an hour, down the Loisach towards Munich. Food and musical entertainment will be provided. Mika, a career changer, has found his calling on the raft, despite the fact that the job as a raftsman is anything but comfortable.
This is strenuous, because otherwise you'll hit a rock and the nice raft ride is over.
Mika wasn't out in the fresh air in his old job as much as he is now.
I'm a trained restaurateur, and then at some point I had the hoe in my hand, the wood, and I learned to love it. And so it just goes on, day in, day out. 4.5 months of fun. And in the winter we make new logs, new oars. That's something very special, I think. That's what the hands of someone who works hard look like.
So schauen die Hände aus von jemandem, der hart arbeitet.
After the start is made, the raft ride goes leisurely. 2.5 hours after departure. The Mühltal, near Straslach. The sun is shining, the weather is good, as is the mood, with lots of alcohol. The rafters heat up the atmosphere.
So, Musik! Schaut's her! Da, schau her, Musikant!
Look here, musician. Go on, so that you don't die of thirst. How about a drink? Because thirst is worse than homesickness, right? Where do you sell shoes?
The guests on board are enjoying their trip, but not for much longer, because things are about to get wild.
We're approaching Europe's largest raft slide. It's 350 meters long, has a height difference of 18 meters, and travels at about 45 kilometers an hour. That's why we have to secure everything so that we don't lose any people, because of course it's also dangerous.
Raftsman Patrick Weidener is already packing up all the loose parts on board for safety reasons.
Pick up all the jugs, bags, bottles, everything from the floor. Otherwise it's gone. Hold on to all hats, and in Bavaria it's tradition. All women to the outside, and please let the men inside.
And well prepared, it goes down Europe's longest raft slide. Can anything or anyone stay dry in the process? Hamburg. Things are getting serious for the shipbuilders on the Elbe. The men want to take the 1.5-ton main propulsion engine back on board the ferry. Shipbuilder Torben Grote will hoist the good piece with a crane. He always keeps an eye on apprentice Melvin Ommer.
When driving a crane, you have to look at the employees first and foremost. If anything breaks in terms of material, that's one thing. That if something happened to an employee, it would be terrible. If I injured someone, or even worse.
Ich werde mein Leben nicht mehr froh, wenn ich da jemanden verletze oder Schlimmeres.
That's why Torben steers the crane very carefully. Above all, it's important that the heavy engine remains steady in the air and doesn't start swinging. On board, colleague Melvin accepts the part. For the time being, the shipbuilders only want to set the engine down on the balcony. From there, they continue with the lift truck.
Up to this point, everything's gone great. What we had before was, when the wind was strong and the engines were very unsteady in the air, and then it just gets annoying and shitty. Then you have to work with 2 or 3 people and tie ropes to it so that you can keep them steady. But this is perfect.
Step 2. The engine must go into the ship. From here on, the uncomfortable part of the work begins, because now muscle power is needed. They continue with the lift truck.
We'll first go over there, make a turn, and then we have to go up there.
Ja, gut.
Such arduous work is simply part of the job. Torben likes that. He has been working here for 24 years already. With combined forces, the shipbuilders try to push the part, which weighs tons, into position.
All right, we'll do the rest with chain hoists. Or do you want to lend a hand? Yep, that's great.
Okay.
Second attempt. Thank God the colleagues are here. Done.
The job is certainly exhausting. Not all we do, of course, but with something like this, you just need the help of your colleagues. It's exhausting, but it's still fun. I save myself the gym.
The men want to lift the engine down into the engine room with chain hoists. Once at the bottom, they then have to freeze the engine into the right place. That requires very good cooperation. The chain hoists alone carry up to 1.5 tons each. This work makes the man sweat tremendously.
We have a good 25 degrees now. Yesterday it was even worse. It was 30 degrees and we had the auxiliary diesel, but it wasn't that heavy. I'll just get a chain hoist again.
First, the engine has to be freed from its pallet. Melvin has found his calling in the craft.
My grandmother doesn't live far from here, and I used to drive by here from time to time when I was a kid. And then, of course, after graduating from high school, it was like, well, what are you going to do now? Continuing school was out of the question for me. I really didn't feel like it anymore. And so I looked around. So I did a week of trial work here. I liked it and have been here ever since. I had nothing to do with ships or anything like that before, but I always worked at home with my father. We have an old Land Rover and motorcycles.
Shortly after, the engine is ready. Melvin and Torben prepare the way down. The next steps in the process will be tricky.
The difficulty here is to get the machine down there without an accident and without getting it stuck somewhere. We have to be a little careful to not get stuck somewhere. But that's still the relaxed part of the whole matter. Of course, it will be difficult to shimmy over there afterwards. Melvin, will you please make sure that the loose chains don't get caught somewhere? Wait. We have to move over a little. I can't get in like this yet.
And so it's down into the depths for the 1.5-ton engine. Salzgitter has been producing pig iron and steel since 1937. Adrian Zayak is a kiln operator. He has to make sure that everything runs as it should. To ensure that the quantity and quality of iron are right, the high kiln workers have to keep an eye on many different parameters. That's Adrian's job.
So,
Marcel, please change 20 grams of humidity on oven B. Of course, it depends on what kind of material we throw in at the top into the oven. The tapping temperatures have to be in a certain range, otherwise we have problems outside with the gutters, because the liquid material can become tough and then we can no longer tap properly.
The values at blast furnace A are correct. There are a total of 3 blast furnaces in the steel mill. Blast furnace B is currently at a standstill. Later, the men want to resume operations. Until then, there is a lot to do. Adrian takes a close look at everything, especially the working platform directly above the tap hole. If the men make mistakes, it can quickly become dangerous. In addition, iron production can be severely disrupted if not everything is exactly right.
We have a platform over us, and down here is the so-called mold-based cooling. This means that if this cooling is provided by this radiant heat, the heat goes upwards and would destroy the platform if it were not cooled. And that's why we have a cooling system here. And I check whether this cooling system is tight, whether no water runs into the channel from above, because iron and water are not a good match.
The refractory material of the channel could be damaged by water as long as the channel is not in operation. If iron runs through later, water could even cause a water vapor explosion. Meanwhile, a colleague prepares the area around the tap hole.
The reason for this is that when we open the oven later and it is then empty and it starts to eject material, we mustn't have any deposit built up in this area.
Without deposit built up, the man can work better and safer. When 70,000 tons of steel have flowed through the channel, it must be repaired.
Guten Morgen.
Good morning. In 5 minutes we're ready? Very good.
Once the gutter is repaired, a second gutter goes into operation. This one was just renewed. Adrian also checks here.
The challenge here after the repair is that the channel gets a certain temperature through the burners, so that the temperature difference between pig iron, which subsequently flows into the channel, and the channel walls is not a problem. Otherwise, we might have deflagrations, or if there were residual moisture, there would be sudden explosions.
Oder wenn Restfeuchte wäre, würde es zu schlagartigen Explosionen kommen.
The gutter has a few days to reach operating temperature. In total, each gutter is in operation for 10 to 12 days. A second gutter for the slag goes off from the main chute.
Before the channel goes into operation, we set a dam here so that the material that then comes up in the channel cannot flow off immediately. First, the plant has to be switched on, and when the plant is ready, this dam, which is then set here, is removed, and then the slag can be discharged.
It all looks good. Soon, they will fire away. The Mühltal near Straslach. The professional raftsmen, Patrick and Mika, have 60 guests on board. For the time being, because now they're going down the largest river slide in Europe at just under 50 kilometers an hour.
Watch out!
What fun! The raftsmen didn't promise too much. The guests are wet but happy and still complete. The journey continues in a cheerful manner with alcohol, at least for the passengers. For the rafters, however, the hard work is far from done.
When the alcohol level rises, people no longer know what they're doing. That's the problem.
Noon. In addition to thirst, the guests are hungry now. Time for a snack. The former restaurateur Mika is happy when his guests are satisfied, and so he also helps out as a waiter.
Lobster and caviar, let's go.
Auf geht's!
Once all the people are served, we sit down too and take a 10-minute break, and then we get right back to it. Be it serving and rafting, first aid, we do the lot.
Bedienung, Flößer, Erste Hilfe, wir machen alles.
And so the drudgery continues for the rafters, while the guests enjoy the good weather with beer and snacks. Such a rift trip costs between 120 and 180 euros per person. Well fed, they continue down the Isar Canal. The raft ride ripples along leisurely until the next raft slide. The rafters work from Tuesday to Sunday. Monday is their day off. To work while others party is normal for raftsman Patrick.
With alcohol, there's always someone who gets abusive, who wants to start a fight or is drunk, falls down. Well, there's always a 10% loss. That's all right. There's always someone who falls into the water, but most of the time they sober up again quickly. It's fine.
Today, however, the journey is relaxed and without accidents, until shortly before the destination, Munich.
Wait, stay like that. Hold it. Stay like that.
Raftsman Mika provides first aid.
Jetzt.
That was lucky. The group reaches Munich. One last highlight shortly before the finish.
We'll drive through there right now and make sure we don't run into anyone.
Arrived. Zentrallende is the last remaining raft jetty in Munich. 500 to 600 rafts dock here every year.
Exhausted, but also glad to have made the day. To bring the raft home without many problems, without any injuries, that makes you happy. You're very relieved.
The passengers make their way home. For the rafters, the work continues. All the rafts are disassembled in Munich and brought back to Wolfratshausen by truck. The first raft for tomorrow still has to be reassembled today. Hard work, and yet Patrick and Michele enjoy their job. Especially on a day like today. The sun is shining and the guests had a great time. Back to the Elbe. In Hamburg, a harbour ferry gets its starboard propulsion engine back. Shipbuilder Torben Grote and apprentice Melvin Ommer use chain hoists to tinker the heavy part back into place. That's not so easy because they don't have much freedom of movement below deck.
Here it's now getting tighter and tighter. Fortunately, you can take so much aside and unscrew. Because, as I said, every centimetre that we somehow gain definitely helps us.
The shipbuilders don't let themselves be rushed, because then something also breaks quickly. To ensure that the heavy propulsion engine gets safely to its place, the two have to work well together. The machine has arrived at the bottom and now needs to be moved a good bit sideways. Torben is taking care of that.
Melvin, do you know what I'm looking at right now? We have to clean the foundations. Let's leave it hanging like that for now. It's hanging good and stable. Let's just do the cleaning first. Bring down the scraper, please.
Torben still wants to clean the foundations for the engine from old paint residues. Working on their knees, on the floor, or overhead on the ceiling, shipbuilders are used to working in uncomfortable positions.
Crouched, too. This ship is still relatively large. With the yellow ship, which is lying there on the slip, the rooms are much smaller and you're crouched the whole time. When you work below deck, it's not nice.
Torben quickly cleaned up the foundations, and shortly after, the work can continue. Now it gets complicated. To move the engine to the side, the shipbuilders have to rehang the chain hoists again and again. Torben has noticed something that worries him.
I have to rehang it. There's too much pull on the small chain hoist.
No sooner said than done. The shipbuilders have to look carefully at where they attached the chain hoists. A small tube, for example, could not hold the heavy weight and would break.
I'm going to try to get this chain hoist out because it's pretty heavy. I'm worried about the chain hoist. I think it can hold the weight, but I just can't pull it higher at some point because the lever is too small and the load too high.
The chains must not hang spread too flat. The flatter the angle, the higher the load on the chain. Apprentice Melvin comes downstairs for the final spurt.
The steeper they are, the better it takes the load. The flatter they are, the worse it is. The higher the load over the attachment points. Vertical is best, with a maximum of 45 degrees. In these tight conditions, it's not possible anyway, but we always have to make sure that things run smoothly. Another thing that doesn't work is to pull too nastily around the corner. Here, for example, it could well happen that if we now move further to there, the hook is pulled here too nastily around the corner, and that's stupid, of course.
Extremely delicate and at the same time very strenuous work. The chain hoists are still holding. The shipbuilders are working their way forward centimetre by centimetre. The machine feet have to fit exactly over the foundations so that Torben and Melvin can fix the engine with screws.
Actually, nothing can go wrong now. We are now here virtually on the rest. That's now only 40 centimetres that we have to go aft, and then we're done.
But these last 40 centimetres are a real challenge. Again and again the men have to readjust and rebuild the chain hoists. And the whole thing in a stoop position, laborious. Piece by piece, things are progressing, but it doesn't fit yet.
There was nothing about lifting, right? Was there? Why don't you try that again? Did that just work? I forgot. It should work.
A final tour de force. The shipbuilders have been working for 5 hours to fit the propulsion engine into the narrow engine room. Then the engine is finally in position. But can Torben get the screws in now?
So.
Nice.
Done. The engine is back in place on its own 2 feet. The men have to reattach some parts that they had to remove for installation.
Ich finde, es hat alles gut geklappt.
I think everything worked out well. Nothing broke. We stayed in one piece. The installation time is also okay.
Die Einbauzeit ist auch okay. Insofern.
In that respect, I'd say it worked out well.
Genau.
Next, the rudder propeller and shaft line are put back on board. Then the shipbuilders have to align everything precisely. And then there's the port engine. But soon, this ferry will be sailing through the port of Hamburg again, thanks to Melvin and Torben. Salzgitter produces steel for many other ships. Adrian Zayak and his colleagues produced the raw material for this at the Smelter, pig iron. The blast furnace operators prepare the next tapping.
We need the right drill for the next tapping.
Many things can go wrong.
If we choose the wrong drill size, the tap is too short or simply too long, and we don't want that. We want to have the average.
The larger the drill, the shorter the runoff time. The drill must be changed after each runoff. The part melts in the heat.
Of course, it's important that we get through reasonably and that we don't have any great gas bubbles, because this can cause a strong ejection right at the beginning of the tapping.
Runoff is one of the most dangerous operations in the smelter. In the worst case, such gas bubbles can also lead to explosions and fires. Today, everything goes smoothly. The hot iron runs through the channels and fills the torpedo ladles, with which it's transported onto the steel mill.
The tapping that's going on now went smoothly. That is, we opened up with a 60mm drill bit. We got through the tap hole just fine. And as you can see, the iron jet is super. It is even, and everything runs in normal condition.
With the iron, the slag also comes out of the tap hole and floats on the iron. In order to let it flow off, the men destroy the dam.
By setting a new dam at the tapping end, for the next tapping, the sand hardens. And when the sand hardens, it's almost like concrete. This means that when the colleague then removes the new dam for the new tapping, he naturally has to use a little more force than usual. And then, of course, there are the odours. Slag naturally has an unpleasant sulphur smell.
Every day New Year's Eve for the nose. Because of the accompanying substances such as sulfur, burns with slag are particularly bad. The slag enters a granulation plant and is processed into sand, which is used for concrete production. Adrian shovels coke ash onto the pig iron. The coke ash softens the surface and keeps the temperature high like a lid. At times it gets too hot at the gully, even with protective clothing.
In the area in front, it's still okay here, but in the area in front it's just too hot. You're only allowed there for a few seconds and then you have to leave.
Further away from the tap hole, one can cope longer.
If you have the protective equipment. You couldn't go there now without protective equipment.
When this tapping is finished, the tap hole has to be closed again so that the blast furnace can produce again. In the meantime, Adrian checks on things at furnace B. This morning, it was still at a standstill. Here too, the iron is now flowing through the chutes again as desired. Pig iron, the basic material for steel products of all kinds.
It is the product that I have produced in the hours on my shift, so to speak. It's the product that I then see here, and that makes me proud. I couldn't imagine any other job because I grew up with it, and this job just fulfills me in every respect.
By the mid-2030s, the company plans to close the blast furnaces and switch to pig iron production with hydrogen. Adrian will then produce green iron,